Hey everyone, what's up? So this video is going to be about Resident Evil, not the entire series, but just one game in particular, or you could kind of say two games in particular, that I believe are underrated and actually ahead of their time too, in terms of just video games in general. So, okay, a bit of context with me and the series of Resident Evil. Resident Evil is actually one of my favorite video game series. Like, I grew up playing with it, and it's been kind of like the one video game series that I kind of go back to alongside Final Fantasy and like my wrestling games and stuff. It's like the one series I could kind of like fall back on and have a good time regardless of whatever entry it is. But Resident Evil is also a very confusing spot too in terms of just gaming. Like it goes all over the place in terms of genre. You can get pure on survival horror, for like with the Resident Evils 1, 2, and 3, the original 1, 2, and 3, or you could get like pure action with like Resident Evils 4, 5, and 6. And then you could also get like amazing remakes with like Resident Evil 1 remake, 2 remake, and 3 remake. And then you also get like the experimental games like Dead Aim, Gun Survivor, can't really say Revelations, but also like Resident Evil 7 also has like experimental stuff to it. So speaking of experimental though, there's 1 to 2 entries in the series that is actually completely underrated, and it's one of those series. It's like one of those entries in it where like it's ahead of its time as well. The two games I'm actually talking about is actually these two. So if you guys know me, you guys know that I'm a huge fan of these two games in the series. And this video is about me telling you why and what made it work and why it was so amazing to me personally. And I know a few of my friends are actually really like crazy about these games because these games were really, really good and really, really ahead of their time. But also somehow it failed and Capcom hasn't really touched it ever since. So with both of these games technically take place between Resident Evil 2 and 3. So it actually shows, like the name implies, Outbreak. It actually shows the actual Raccoon City incident, its outbreak, and how it all happened from not the perspective of like Leon Craig or like the main characters, but from actual side characters. Like side characters like everyday cops, civilians, bartenders, like stuff like that. Just everyday people trying to live through the outbreak nightmare. Kind of like a parallel to what happened in 2020 with the pandemic, and same thing that's going on right now. So in a way, Resident Evil Outbreak Files 1 and 2. So this would be File 1. It doesn't really say, but it's File 1. And this is File 2. Are technically, in a way, you can put them together. They're like one full game. They'll tell you like different segments of stories in Resident Evil 2 and 3's timeline. And yeah, it was one of those games that came out of nowhere, left an impression. It left a solid impression in what survival horror could be. But unfortunately, Capcom didn't really follow on that until maybe decades later. We're not sure. So originally, these two games came out back in 2004? 2004 for Fall 2 and 2003 for Fall 1. So these came out around the same time original Resident Evil movies were coming out. The Milwaukee ones. Did I say it right? I probably said it last time. But the live action Resident Evil. So this came around the same time Resident Evil Apocalypse came out, which was in 2004. So it came out then, but these games were actually very different. They were more classic centric Resident Evil games. So they were more like try to like look for items, key items, avoid zombies, try to survive against zombies, but look for key items, get the key items, and then unlock new areas to progress further and try to escape. So it was more like Resident Evils 1, 2, and 3 in that regard. And but the big twist was, if you guys know, the big twist for this was, you see that little bonfire there? Online only. Online only. So what that meant was, if you turn to the back and look right there, you can see it. It was actually 1 to 4 players. This was actually the very first multiplayer horror, survival horror game out there. And basically, it took everything that you knew about Resident Evil at the time. The the tank controls, looking for items, key items, looking for resources, saving your ammo, dodging zombies, beating up zombies, destroying zombies, monsters, all that. It took all that you knew from Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, and Code Veronica and made it into a multiplayer centric form. And that right there was actually ahead of its time, and it honestly hasn't been done since. It Capcom kind of came close. I'll explain that later, but it hasn't been done since that well because it was basically each game had, I think it was around 4 to 5 episodes, and it wasn't like typical Resident Evil where like you're just dropped in and you have to explore and keep moving around. So this one's kind of like it drops you into different scenarios and it'll show you what happens behind the scenes of the Resident Evil 2 and 3, and basically drops you in and you're one of 8 characters, and there's you and then 3 other players, and basically you guys have to try to escape from whatever the scenario is. It was almost like a an escape room, but in video game format. So you have to like it drops you into a scenario. You have to find your way out, and along the way, there's zombies, there's monsters, there's a boss, and then each level had like its own unique thing you had to do to get out. And also on top of that, there was a meter, a special meter that if it reaches 100, you actually turn into a zombie. It was like the viral infection meter, and it increases anytime you take too long. Like it'll just gradually keep ticking. If you tick long, zombies bit you, it will accelerate it, and if you're crawling and dying on the floor, it'll also accelerate. But it wasn't really as like negative as it sounds. Really, it was more or less a timer. Like it basically told you, like, okay, you got like 30 minutes to an hour to get through this thing, and there was ways you could actually stop it too. You could use a herb, first aid, and there was this thing called like wasn't it antiviral? It was almost like it looked like a Lysol bottle that you would spray, and it was like stop the thing from like progressing. And yeah, it was actually it really really advanced for its time. And the multiplayer mode was actually amazing too because it's you and 4 players, and there was no actual voice chat. This was like before voice chat was everything, before Xbox Live kind of took over and changed all that. There was no voice chat, and the way you had to do multiplayer was that before you get into like these levels, you had these lobbies. They're like these lobbies, like they actually look like old school 4chan message boards. And basically you would go in and then you'll talk to people. Like it would be like a general lobby, like, kind of like when you play like an MMO, you'll see like a shout message and somebody's like talking to everybody on the server. It would be like that. And then you enter a room. When you enter a room, you get to talk to people and you get to coordinate what do you have to do, what you gotta do, what do you need to do, and all that stuff. And it was fun because you had to plan it. But if you don't plan it, it actually everything becomes a snafu, and you're so screwed. Things could happen, things get lost, things could get chaotic, and the game had like a really deep randomizer mode in multiplayer mode. Basically, you can't voice chat, so you have this like ad lib, contextual voice commands for your characters. So like they'll be like, "Oh, this character's name, come here," and stuff like that. You have to like guess what they're saying, and then have to like pick things up, drop things, pick things up, drop things in order to represent to tell people like, "Hey, grab this thing right here," or whatever. And it was kind of like your like smart AIs running around. Even though you're not AIs, you're actually human players. It was like smart AIs, and you're walking around doing all this. It was completely randomized. And then there are times where like you get split up from your team members. You don't know where they went. You don't know what happened to them, and you kind of have to go in the back of your mind. You have to think like, "Oh crap, they're dead," and I have to carry on and finish the level on my own. And like the game would never tell you if they died or not, if they got disconnected or anything like that. If anything did happen, they will wander around like a computer, or you won't know. You won't know they're a computer, or they'll actually would have died and they would have become a zombie, and you have to kill them to get the loot and get whatever they dropped and stuff. So it was ahead of its time. It's ahead of its time. I've had so much fun playing with my friends when it originally released. It was a game. It was like my first ever multiplayer game that I would play with friends, and we would play it late at night from like 1 a.m. to like 7 a.m. in the morning. We would sit there on our PS2s. We would be playing it. We would like constantly like text each other. Like this is back in the day when we didn't have iPhones and all that. It was like normal SMS texting, and like you had like 130 characters to text and stuff. So we would constantly do that, trying to like relay messages like, "Hey, where are you? Where are you? We need you," and stuff. And then other times we would just call each other on the phone and be like, "Hey, where are you? Like we need the key item. Like get over here." You're like, "Oh crap, I'm like stuck. I'm fighting this one monster. I don't have any ammo." You're like, "Oh crap, we have to go and grab it." It was like this like fun chaoticness, and it was like it is what do you expect from like a zombie survival game, and so it was a good game. There was a few issues though, like the netcode wasn't as good. Like they use what did they use? I think one of them used GameSpy. It was like GameStop's online access stuff or something like that. It was weird. It was like it was GameSpy. GameSpy was like this really crappy net access code stuff. Um, it was horrible. Like you would have monsters lagging across the map, and how good your internet connection was. You would have monsters like instead of walking, they will just like slide across the floor. And sometimes like there's one time we were fighting a tyrant, and we were fighting him, and this tyrant has like an instant kill move. Like all tyrants have instant kill moves in the series. It is he basically like instead of walking or sliding where you can see him because of the lag and everything, he actually just like he was here and he just teleported right in front of you, and you're like, oh crap! And he was just getting ready to do the upgrade, and you have to dodge right out of the way. Yeah, you have to think on the spot what you're going to be doing, and it was fun. There's like so many times we yelled and screamed and cussed and everything, and this was before voice chat too, so we were probably yelling, cussing, and everything on our own. And so the game had lag. It wasn't that good in terms of netcode. It was laggy, and also if you're playing like on the original PS2 without the hard drive, or you're playing on the PS2 Slim without the hard drive, um, the game took forever to load. Like it just took forever to load because every time you had to go through a door, this is like classic Resident Evil. So every time you go through doors, you see a load screen, and for these games on the PS2 without the hard drive installed, it took anywhere from like 15 to 30 seconds for the game to load the next area. So it kind of like it ruined the flow a lot. And especially now when I go back and play sometimes, like it kind of like that load time kind of just takes you out of it. Like it gives me enough time to actually take maybe 3 sips out of my coffee, check my Facebook notifications, send out a message, and then by the time I'm done, the game loaded up again. So it hasn't aged well in terms of load times. And then the other thing that was a big issue with it was that it came out at the wrong time. And what I mean by that is that when Resident Evil Outbreak came out, another game in the series actually came out at the same time, and it was the biggest hit for the series. And it is still considered a big hit for the series. And you guys probably know what I'm talking about. But it was Resident Evil 4 on the GameCube. So what Capcom had, they had a license deal with Nintendo to release Resident Evil 4 exclusively for the GameCube, and then they also had to deal with Sony to release the side games on there too, the side games on the PS2. And so this was one of the side games that they had to release at the same time as Resident Evil 4 was released. And while this game did everything amazingly well, you guys are probably gonna hate me for this. Resident Evil 4 did a lot of things wrong for the series. Like, sure, it was an amazing third-person shooter at the time. It pushed the boundaries of what you could do in a third-person shooter ahead. Like, it introduced QuickTime events. It introduced the behind-the-back camera, the aiming. It introduced all that we use today in stuff like Gears of War and games like that. But Resident Evil 4 also did a lot of damage to the series in general in terms of survival horror, and in terms of like the openness of how the series was, in terms of where the series could go. Resident Evil 4 was a new start, but also an end, if that makes sense. But this video isn't about me ripping on Resident Evil 4. Like, I actually enjoy Resident Evil 4. If you guys know me, I bought Resident Evil 4 almost on almost on every single system out there. I don't know why I do it. I just go out there and I buy it, and I'm just like, why did I buy this? And I end up playing it, and I end up playing Resident Evil 4, and I end up going through it, and like I constantly, I don't know why I do it. But this video is not about Resident Evil 4. This is about Resident Evil Outbreak Falls 1 and 2. So this came out at the wrong time, and because of that, the sales for this wasn't that good. Capcom like underestimated how well the game could be and all that stuff. And because of Resident Evil 4 is just like sold like crazy. This didn't sell that much. It was also because people thought, oh, you have to be online only just to play the game. And let me tell you, these games, you can actually play it offline. You don't need to play it online with other people. You can actually play it offline by yourself. And with this game, you get like 2 AI computers helping out. And this one, you get to actually pick who helps you out and stuff. And it changes how they react and stuff. So you can play it still offline. But it's just because of Resident Evil 4, this game didn't sell that well. And by not selling well, Capcom kind of like lost faith in being this kind of experimental in the series. It wasn't until years later when they finally did some more experimentations in terms of multiplayer for Resident Evil. So with both of these games, they ended up losing faith in the classic style Resident Evil, and like they weren't believing that people were actually like attaching to that style. They were going to move on to the third person survival horror action style of Resident Evil 4. And so what happened, unfortunately, was that a few years after this came out, like around 2005, 2006, they actually shut down the servers for Resident Evil Outbreak. They shut it down, and you couldn't play the game online anymore. You couldn't play it online, and then like a few years later, I believe they shut off the server for Fallout 2, like around 2008. What happened was because of Resident Evil 4, and also because it didn't sell well, and lastly because we were moving on to a new generation of systems. Like the PS2 was dying. It was basically murdered by the PS3 at the time when they shut down the servers. So it was like everybody was on the PS3, everybody was on the 360, everybody was on the Wii. Nobody was on the PS2, nobody was on the Xbox, nobody was on the GameCube anymore playing those games. Everyone was just moving on to the new stuff. And it's a shame. It's a shame, really, because this game, like, it has like almost like a cult following. These games have a cult following to it, and there are still people out there. Like, I'm not gonna like really give links or anything like that or go into detail about it because I don't want to get sued by Capcom. But there are people out there who try to keep these two games alive on the PC, and like you got mods and all that stuff. And it's a bit of a hassle to get it running, but when it runs, it gives you that nostalgia feeling in playing multiplayer Resident Evil. But at the same time, it's also, it doesn't have the same vibe. Like, because you got to go through all these things, all these loops to get the game running. And so, yeah. So it's not as you're not as into it by the time you actually do sit down and start playing. And also there's like a bunch of glitches, bugs, and all that stuff, all that stuff. Me personally, I don't have it. I have a Mac and it's only for PC, so I don't use it. I know friends who have actually played it. They could kind of test the same thing I just said. It's like, it's fun for a while, but like it just stuff is missing because it's not fully supported by Capcom, so it's all fan run and all that stuff, and it's like one big legal hoopla mess and stuff. And so for a long time, multiplayer Resident Evil, this was what it was. This was like the golden age of multiplayer Resident Evil. Sure, Capcom kind of brought it back with the Resident Evil 5. It was the two-player co-op, but it was more of like the action-centric style. And then same thing with Resident Evil 6. It was action-centric style. And then the closest we got to something like this again, was actually with 2 side games and one other game that was more multiplayer-centric. It was Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2, and also Resident Evil Resistance, which just came out last year. So with Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2, it was an actual Resident Evil game that kind of tried to blend everything together. So it blended the action-centric style of like Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, but also kind of like added a bit of like classic Resident Evil style into it as well. And you have this classic story, you get to play as Jill and one of them, the other one you get to play as Claire. So Resident Evil Revelations 1 was Jill, and Revelations 2 was Claire. And you have that, and then there's the extra mode in it, which kind of gave that classic vibe. It was called Raid Mode. And Raid Mode, in Revelations 1, Raid Mode is basically go through the different segments of parts of the game, and you basically just try to clear out all the monsters and try to like progress ahead. And then you'll unlock this thing called the Ghost Ship. The Ghost Ship is basically you get to explore the whole map without a timer or anything, and all you have to do is kill all the zombies and get to the very end of the ship and escape. And that you can play by yourself or with another player, and that was actually really fun. It gave vibes of this, and it was really cool. It was really awesome. I played it a ton on the 3DS. I bought it on the Wii U, played it a ton on there, and I also have it on PS4. Played it a ton on there. And then with Revelations 2, they had it was two-player co-op. So you had local two-player split screen co-op, and it was good. It was good. The only thing that was a problem was that like it suffered from the way RE6 and RE5 would have local co-op, and it's kind of like it off-centered the camera for both players. So like player one's like screen would be kind of like up on the top left, and player two screen would be on the bottom right, and then you have like these two black bars like right there, and it was annoying, but it was also fun. It was also fun too. There's a survival aspect to it, so that was also fun. And they also brought back raid mode, but the raid mode was a little bit different. It was more of like a well, what's that word? It's like that pay as you go kind of thing. But not pay as you go. It was like not gotcha. It was like a games as a service. There we go. It was like a games as a service, basically, the raid mode in Revelations 2, and basically you would have to buy these extra coins and stuff to keep going and all that stuff. It's like one of those free to play type of stuff in a pay to play game. So it was really weird, and it didn't really click as well. Sure, it had a lot more characters. It had more of an RPG mechanic to it, and it had more levels. But like there was like a lot of stuff that kind of like dragged it down and bogged it down and like nonsense in where compared to Revelations 1 where you just want to keep going in the raid mode. So there was that. There was those two games. And then maybe what was it, like 5 years later, after Resident Evil 7 and after the Resident Evil 2 remake came out, we were getting the Resident Evil 3 remake. And alongside that, we had Resident Evil Resistance, which was weird because a lot of people thought it was going to be the next Resident Evil Outbreak or something like that, because Capcom was going more towards the classic style while incorporating like a third person style to it. So everyone thought it was like, oh, it's going to be like a HD remaster remake of the Resident Evil Outbreak series and stuff. We didn't know much about it. All they said was Resident Evil Resistance. We got like a trailer and we're hyped for it. And then eventually we found out that, oh, it's going to be a asymmetrical game. And by that, it was like 4 players against one other player. The other player was like a mastermind, kind of like a Wesker, putting traps and all that stuff. So if you guys seen the movie, ever saw the live action movies, and it'd be like all those traps, the laser quarters, and all that stuff, you'd be that mastermind setting up all those traps, and everyone else would be trying to escape. And don't get me wrong, it's fun, and it gives a little bit of the vibe of what Outbreak could be in a modern setting, but it's too short. It's too short, and there's not enough you could do on it. And it's like, if one person disconnects, that's it. The game's over. Compared to these games where one person disconnected, you still kept going. You still kept going, and the computer took over. So with Resistance, it was okay. It's fun to play in short bursts, but it's not what Outbreak should be. Like it's because it's not even Outbreak, but it's not what Outbreak is or should be or could be, and it it kind of left a sour taste. But recently, and a couple months ago, there was a hack. There was a Capcom hack, which some of you guys may know, where like most of Capcom's like upcoming games and all that stuff was like leaked out, and people kind of like knew what was happening, and like some of Resident Evil 8 was like spoiled as well. And with that, it was kind of like, oh, whoa, this is new. And then what we found out was that, oh, Capcom could be working on the Resident Evil Outbreak, like a remaster or something. There's something new. So it seems like Capcom kind of like learned the lesson with Resistance, and they know that fans are clamoring for more of this kind of multiplayer Resident Evil. And so we'll see if that actually happens. We don't know. All we know that's coming out for Resident Evil this year is Resident Evil 8, or Resident Evil Village, as people call it, and also the Resident Evil movie reboot, which is supposed to mix Resident Evil 1 and 2's game story together into like an actual good movie that's better than the other live action Resident Evil movies. And so, yeah, it's like, in closing, Resident Evil Outbreak and Outbreak Fallout 2, they were ahead of its time. They were these multiplayer games that like you could play with friends, you could get deeper into the Resident Evil lore, and it just felt right. Like it's one of those things where like if I try to like explain it to people who never played online gaming back in the day, like if I only explain to people who only played Xbox Live and only played online game with voice chat, and I told them, oh no, this is different. This is old school. This is where you don't use headsets. You don't communicate like that. You gotta listen to your characters, and you gotta use proximity chat of your characters. That was the other thing I forgot to mention. Like inside Resident Evil Outbreak is proximity chat. So if you go maybe 5 rooms away from you, You can't hear the other person when they're talking or screaming or firing a bullet. Like, you won't know what they're doing. And that was amazing. That was actually really fun. That was really fun to have in action. But like trying to explain that to people who are only used to playing voice chat, it kind of like it kind of goes right over their head. So with these games, I hope they come back either as a remake or a remaster HD port, or as a like a brand new entry, because what was sadly what they were planning to do, they're supposed to be four of these. They're supposed to be four of these and five levels in each game. So there's supposed to be Fallout 2 and then a Fallout 3 and then like a Fallout 4, which was supposed to like end the whole Outbreak series. But they never got around to doing it. So that actually kind of sucked. But I have so many friends who have actually played this with me back in the day, and they would tell you that this is one of those better Resident Evil games. Like, if you love the series so much, you need to go out and get a copy of these, play these, because you cannot go wrong with these games. Even though you're playing with AI and the load time suck, there is a charm to it because it's the old school Resident Evil. It's the old school Resident Evil that you haven't seen in a real long time. Not until Resident Evil 7 came back, 7 Remake 2 and Remake 3 came back. So this is kind of like those old school Resident Evil games that like you're gonna have countless fun. It's a good way to put it would be like these were the Left 4 Dead before the Left 4 Dead games ever came out. If that makes sense. So, anyways, guys, that's just me talking about my love for Resident Evil Outbreak, the series, because almost every year I tend to like go through this nostalgia feeling run thing where I'm kind of like, you know what, I want to play some Outbreak, and I play it and I realize the game is not the game anymore unless I play it online with friends, and then I get like emotional. I'm like, damn it, I want Capcom to make another one of these. And Capcom, if you're watching this and you're watching this on my YouTube, you guys better make another Resident Evil Outbreak, okay? Because I'm telling you, in today's market, it's gonna sell. Because these came out when online gaming was at its like taking baby steps, and people didn't really know console online gaming was gonna be big and huge and all that stuff. We all wrote it off. We thought it was gonna be like a 3D game, which kind of 3D game kind of sucked. But online gaming has continued to evolve, to continue to get better, and I'm sure if they release these games today, if these were released today, Capcom will make so much more money off of these kind of games than they would with like the Umbrella Corps or Resistance or stuff like that. Stuff that doesn't work for the Resident Evil series. These games worked, and yeah. So me just talking about this, like it'll do some justice, but like I just recommend you guys go and find a copy of these games and play them. Play them if you can on the PS2. Play them like the legal way, buying the copies and playing. If you can't, then well, there's other ways to do it. So I'm not gonna say what they are, but you guys probably already know. So just go and play it and have fun, and make sure you bring like 3 friends of yours along too to play it with. Because let me tell you something here. Nothing's funnier than running for your life when Mr. X is chasing you with a group of friends. I know it sounds very stupid and weird, but like it's true. Like when me and my friends used to play this and we were getting chased by Mr. X, we were just like, oh my god, run. We were yelling at each other over the phone. Imagine that happening today with like Discord and all that stuff. You guys are gonna laugh like crazy. If you guys want to play games like this though, but you can't find a copy of this and you want to play like actual legal 4-player co-op zombie games, I recommend getting World War Z. Normally that's on sale these days. So I recommend getting that. It's a mix between Resident Evil and Left 4 Dead. It's 4-player co-op zombie. I recommend getting that. I recommend The Force. If you guys haven't played The Force, go and get that game and play it with your friends. It's available for almost all systems except I think Switch. And then also, I recommend getting Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2 and play the raid mode with your friends. And I also recommend just, pick up Resident Evil 3, because if you get Resident Evil 3, you get Resident Evil Resistance. And if you actually have 4 friends, you can actually play that. And it's actually pretty fun. It's fun when you play with a group of 4. And then also, what else? There's other games. Other zombie games that I'm thinking about. Zombie Army Trilogy is another game that I recommend you guys probably check out if you're into it. It's more Left 4 Dead than Resident Evil, but it's pretty good. But anyways, guys, that is my video about Resident Evil Outbreak. I went way longer than I thought I would have talking about this, almost 30 minutes. So thank you guys for sitting here, listening to me rant about these two games. I'll be on later on playing more on my Twitch. I planning sometime soon to play Ada's story in Resident Evil 6 with my cousin, so make sure you guys check that out on my Twitch. Other than that, you guys have a great day. Peace.